Put me out of my misery. Fantastic. Love the ideas, George. No, thank you. No, thank you. It's a very real obsession, okay? My feelings on the book series should be taken with several grains of salt. They were like, what the fuck is wrong with you? I was obsessed, all right? Well, hello. Welcome back to my channel. Joshana here to talk about A Song of Ice and Fire and Game of Thrones and my general experience with this world, the show and the books, because I feel like it's weird, okay? It's not weird. It's a mess. I just recently finished Dance with Dragons. Finally finished Song of Ice and Fire series. So just want to get into that. I started rereading these. The first two books I had read a few years back. I'll get into that. But this year I have read through the series in its entirety. So I'll start off initially with giving you my ratings just up front. And you'll see a trend. And then I'll get into my experience with this world and everything. And then explaining my experience and my feelings. I'll get into my feelings. And hopefully all of this will explain why I feel the way that I feel. So my ratings that I gave to these books. Game of Thrones, the first book, 4.5. Clash of Kings, 3.75. Mostly just because even in the show, season 2 just isn't one of my favorites as far as most of the plot lines. The Tyrion plotline, Tyrion being Hand of the King, is one of my favorites of the entire series, and that's in season 2. But kind of mostly everything else going on in season 2 and in book 2 is like to me. So that's why I was like slightly lower. But then Storm of Swords back up to 4.5. Feast for Crows, 3, and Dance with Dragons, 2.75. All right, let's get into it. I am already preemptively just waiting for the comments from people being like, you're not a real fantasy fan. How dare ye? How can you say you love this world if you don't love all of these books, etc.? But it is what it is. This is one of the many reasons I'm never going to probably blow up in the adult fantasy booktube sphere, because I just cannot convince myself to love the things that other people love, the big ones that people love, you know? Okay, so my experience with this whole world and everything. I never had read the books prior to seeing the show, and I didn't even watch the first 4 seasons as they came out. I got caught up with the first 4 seasons in between 4 and 5, in between seasons 4 and 5. When I say I got caught up, I mean I got caught up in one weekend. My coworkers at this newer job I had started at the time. We were talking, just getting to know each other, and talking about how we all love like Lord of the Rings, those movies. Like, oh, and I was like, no, I love it. And they were like, oh, so you probably love Game of Thrones then. And I was like, I've never seen it or read the books. And they were both just like, what? You have to watch it. Oh my God, if you love Lord of the Rings, like you're gonna love Game of Thrones. I was like, oh, okay. I just had never like paid that much attention to it. I knew it was a big thing. I knew it was like a hugely popular show. I just didn't have any interest in starting it. I am a consistent sitcom rewatcher, and I don't often pick up new dramas. It's just not something I really do that much. So I was just like, all right, fine, whatever. I'll check it out, and I'll see if I like it. Went home that Friday, and all I did all weekend was watch Game of Thrones and sleep minimally. So I went back on Monday and I was like, I'm caught up. And they were like, what the fuck is wrong with you? I was obsessed, all right? And I have now seen the show in its entirety, like start to finish, watching every full episode 4 times, which isn't a crazy amount by any means. I think there's probably a lot of people who have watched it in its entirety way more than that. However, the thing is, I am an avid reaction channel viewer. I've talked about this before, and I've mentioned before how many reaction channels I have seen go through Game of Thrones. I am not exaggerating. I counted one time. I have seen at least 50 channels go through Game of Thrones from start to finish. obviously watching reaction channels, unless you pay for Patreon, which I have been a patron for a few of these channels, but like maybe 5 to 10 of them, where like the full reactions are available to the full episode, right? But mostly, by and large, it's the highlights, right? They fair use on YouTube. They can't include their full reaction. So it's like the highlights of the episodes. So I have seen over 50 channels do that from start to finish. And then there's probably another 15-ish channels that I've seen go through the whole show, but where I didn't watch like every single one of their reactions to every single episode. Like, so there was like, you know, a handful of episodes in each channel or in each season that I would watch that channel. So it's a lot, okay? At any given time, I am in the middle of probably, like, I'm watching probably at least 3 different channels going through Game of Thrones. Like, I can't think of the last time where I wasn't actively, like, in the middle of watching someone go through it. Where, like, I wasn't currently watching any Game of Thrones reactors. I'm always watching Game of Thrones reactors. Like, it's an obsession. It's a very real obsession, okay? And sometimes they are in the same, like, time frame, so they're all right around the same episode. But then there's sometimes one of the channels that's, like, 2 seasons ahead or behind or whatever. So they're, like, all over the place, right? I'm very familiar with the TV show storylines, but they're just kind of all jumbled into my brain, right? And as I mentioned, I read the first 2 books on audio many years ago. Like, I think it was 2017 or 2018? Like, towards the beginning of my booktube career. I listened to the first 2 on audio, and I started listening to the third one, and then I just decided, I do not like the audiobook narrator, for one thing. My God. But also, it was just, like, not the format for me. I was like, I'm not paying attention. Like, I'm just not paying attention. It was a time where I was realizing, like, fantasy, especially, like, really complex with lots of different characters and all these things going on audio is just not the move for me personally. So I DNF'd Storm of Swords at that time, just with the mindset of once the show is, and the show wasn't finished then either. So I was like, once the show is finished, I will try this again with the physical books, right? And so then I waited until this year to start doing that, a couple years after the show ended, right? But once again, I'm always watching reaction channels. I have not stopped. So I'm still very, like, immersed in the world of the show. And I did actually rewatch the show in its entirety in 2021 or 2022 with my current boyfriend. So I have seen, like, the actual show fully myself as well more recently. So yeah, all these storylines and character arcs and everything are just, like, muddled in my brain. I have them very, like, I know what order they're in, like, for the show. I can tell you, like, this happens then, that happens then, that happened before that, like, very familiar with all of it. But reading the books, someone will reference something that I'm like, oh, I guess I did read that, right? That already happened? Or am I just thinking it's familiar because I remember it from the show? Or did I already read that? Did that already happen? I don't remember that happening in the books, though. It's like, who knows? Who knows? I don't know, obviously. So all of that to say that my feelings on the book series should be taken with several grains of salt. Because I feel like I just have a very weirdo, like, history with this world and just a very weird reading experience. You know, I wish I could have, like, gone a whole year without watching the show or being into the reactions and then, like, tried the books. But I just can't, man. I love the reactions. It's just weird because I'm so, like, stupid familiar with the larger plot points. Because that's the thing, too. There are definitely things that are different from the books to the show, especially in book 4 and 5. And there's some things that are wildly different, right? But a lot of it, I would say most of it, is either the same or it's just like, oh, a character that is in the books, but we didn't have that character in the show, but we took something that happened to them in the books and gave that to a character in the show. You know what I mean? So, like, the storyline will still be there, or this, like, thing that happens to a character is still there. It just happens to a different character in the show. They just kind of, like, pared it down and simplified a lot of it. again, there are certainly things that just aren't in the show at all from the books, but I'm very familiar with the main plot points, the larger like overview plot points and character arcs. So, moral of the story is that for me personally, with my experience with this world and these characters and these stories, the visual medium is better. I just think it works better in visual format. It's way more exciting. It's way more immersive. You get more connected to the characters and all of that. I just think it's better. Now, I know season 8 especially, but even season 7 as well, they're not my favorites. They're definitely not. They're bad. They're not good in my opinion. I'll still watch them though. Like I don't hate it so much that I'm like, never again. I'm just like, I watch it begrudgingly being like, okay, there's things I still like about it, but then there's things that I'm like, God, just like ruined it. They ruined it, man. But that's the thing, is I wanted to read the damn books because if/when George R. R. Martin finishes the final 2 books, I want to be able to read them and like follow along with the book storylines, right? At any rate, yeah, so my personal opinion is just the show is better. The show is better, man. Getting into what I think George R. R. Martin does well. Obviously, I understand that while I think the show is better, the show wouldn't exist without the fucking books. Like, duh, I know, I get it. The show wouldn't exist without George R. R. Martin's ideas and a lot of his dialogue, especially in the first 3 seasons. His overview, bullet point, character arcs, his ideas for character arcs, top notch, stellar. His ideas for storylines, which some of it, I mean, he gets from real history anyway, but the way he lays out these storylines, these story arcs, the bullet points of it, fantastic. Love the ideas, George. And definitely building a very fascinating world and history and lore of this world. It's fascinating. I fucking love Fire and Blood. I've read it twice. I love World of Ice and Fire. I've read it once. I want to read it again. I like always want to be reading World of Ice and Fire. Those are like fake history books. They read like a history textbook. I'm obsessed. I love them because it's just so fascinating to me, this lore he created. But for me personally, what I think he doesn't do so well is executing these ideas. The bullet points, like telling someone like, oh, this happens and then this happens. Oh, it sounds so exciting and cool and badass and epic. It does, right? Reading it, not so much for me personally. Again, the first book and the third book, the first 3 books, like all of this is much better to me. But book 4 and 5, I think it's that thing that we see happen with a lot of authors when they get like so big, where their editors, the publishers kind of say, do what you want. We're not gonna cut it down that much. You've earned the right to like just fucking go for it. But like the man needs to be reined in my opinion, 100%. Because like I said, while I love the fake history books and they're very dry, I don't want that in the novels unless it is actually necessary for context for me as the reader. While I'm reading this scene or this storyline, do I require this background information to understand what's going on now? Yes or no? Sometimes George includes stuff that I would say, yes, that is relevant. I need that context to really get a full understanding of what's going on here. But fucking hell, a lot of it, no, it's not necessary. It's that thing that I've seen people give advice for writers of like, yeah, build your crazy background of your world. If you're writing a, complex fantasy world, write everything down. Have that background, that history in your brain. Put it somewhere. It doesn't all need to actually go in the book though. It helps you create a richer world and richer characters and a richer history to have it exist, but it doesn't all have to be actually in the fucking book. Pick and choose what is actually key to include. And then if you want, have something like the World of Ice and Fire where you put all that other crap in there that wasn't really necessary. And I just think, particularly in books 4 and 5, he needed to do that a lot more. He needed to edit it down a lot more. There is just so much, in my opinion, in those 2 books. It's a little bit in the first 3 books too. There are things where I'm like, yeah, I probably didn't need a clue, but it's way less. Way fucking less. And in books 4 and 5, there's just so much tedious crap. Did I need 2 whole pages of Jon Snow detailing what is in the larder and the pantry at Castle Black with excruciating detail? No, I didn't, but I got it. Just like, I don't care. Like, you could tell me this general information a lot quicker and much more efficiently. I'm not saying you gotta just not even mention this at all, not mention that the larder is running low and that there's like only a few things like this and that and the other thing. But I'm sorry, I don't think it adds that much to the story, if anything, to have 2 whole pages listing every single goddamn thing. I don't. I'm sure there are readers out there who like love it. Great for you, man. But I personally feel like a lot of people convince themselves that they like it because it's George R. R. Martin, so it's got to be great. And I'm like, no, I don't think this is necessary all the time. It's just simply not. Like I said, sometimes yes. Sometimes he includes like, okay, we're here in this place. Here's a little bit of background history about this house. And it's relevant. And it's like, oh, okay, that gives me added context that I need for this scene. But then other times he does it where I'm like, what the fuck was the point of that? I'm like, maybe it'll come back later. Thus far hasn't. Where I'm like, okay, what the fuck, man? I don't get it. Also, his characters, the way he writes his characters, it's so fucking weird. Because again, I know that the show and the characters of the show wouldn't be what they are without what he wrote. But again, I think the show, at least in the first handful of seasons, did a far better job of like picking and choosing what is relevant. And, I don't know, making the characters a little bit better, honestly. I'm sorry. Like, Tyrion is my favorite. Several times in the books, I'm like, who the fuck is this guy? I don't really like him, you know? And even in the show, he's not always likable. He's not always like the greatest person. He's morally gray several times throughout, but like at his core is like a good person. But man, in the books, sometimes I'm like, you're skeevy and like just gross, and I don't like it. Like, no thank you. No thank you. It's weird too, because again, the dialogue, several pieces of dialogue from the books, in the first few books particularly, are just cut and pasted into the show. But reading it in the books, it just feels like cold and disconnected. I don't feel like a connection to any of the characters while reading the books, really. Even in the earlier books that I like more, I still, while reading them, was kind of like, I don't know, I'm not like, I don't know if I read these without seeing the show, if I would get at all connected with these characters. I don't think I would. Again, take everything I'm saying in this regard with a grain of salt, because the fact of the matter is I did watch the show first, and I am very familiar with the show. It's like, I wish I could like have an alternate reality to like play that out and see how I would have felt if I had just read the books without being familiar with the show at all, like with having never seen the show. But knowing myself as a reader, I think I would have DNF'd this series, honestly. Like, I think I would have felt like, God, I love these ideas, but I don't like reading the way he tells the story. I like the ideas for the story. I like the ideas for the characters, the bullet points, the overview of what I would explain to someone of like, oh, this is who they're and they do this and that. But the way he executes it, I just don't find that engaging at all. I just don't. So sorry. So yeah, I've read them. Dance with Dragons in particular, I haven't done my like wrap up, my recent reads or whatever, a few reviews yet. That's the one I rated the lowest, but like definitely take my opinions on that book in particular with a grain of salt, because the skim reading that was going on I was heavily skim reading quite a bit of that shit. Just being like, I get it. Oh my God. Like, I just couldn't. But, and the last like 10%, it's like with Mistborn, the third book in the Mistborn series, I said when I did my review, I barely read the last 20% of that book, to the point where I went and looked up a chapter summary to be like, what did I fucking miss? Because I know I missed shit. Same thing here with the last like 10% or so of Dance with Dragons. I went and looked at chapter summaries because I was like, I was so fucking heavily skimming. And it's weird because I was reading another book at the same time, or around the same time. This other book I read in about, I think it was 16 days, and I read Dance with Dragons in 16 days. So same amount of time. But that other book, it was just like, oh, normal reading experience. I enjoyed it. Cool, great, grand, wonderful. It took me a little longer. I'm a slower reader. That's fine. Dance with Dragons felt like I was walking through fucking molasses. I just was like, put me out of my misery. I could not. I simply could not. But my thing is, I wanted to fucking read the books because I do want to see, because again, his ideas are better than how they fucking ended the show. And I want to see how he ends it, if he ever does. I want to be able to pick up Winds of Winter and, Dream of Spring or Dream for Spring, whenever they get published, if they ever get published. Highly likely that Winds of Winter will, I believe, in the next few years, hopefully. That's way more likely. Dream for Spring, I don't know, man, if we'll ever get that. I have no idea. But if we do, I want to be able to, like, okay, different plot lines, there are different things going on in the book, and, like, I've read what's going on in the book, I can continue. But I'm never rereading these books again. I cannot see it happening. To the point where I'm like, should I just unhaul them? But, like, I love the world so much. I do. I'll probably reread Fire and Blood again. Like, I could see myself rereading that 100%. And World of Ice and Fire for sure. Probably several times throughout my life. I love that shit. And I'll keep rewatching the show, but Song of Ice and Fire series, I don't know. Whenever Winds of Winter comes out, if it ever comes out, I will need to, like, recap. I will just go to the wiki of Ice and Fire and read the chapter summaries to get caught back up with what the fuck is going on in the books. I can't do it. I can't subject myself to it again. So, yeah. Call me a fake fantasy fan if you want, or a fake Game of Thrones fan if you want. It is what it is. Like I said, it would probably be different if I'd never seen the show. Might even be different if I had seen the show but wasn't so obsessed with reaction channels. But alas, here we are. This is the fact. I am obsessed. If you've read this series, let me know what your thoughts have been on it. If you're like, Jashana, you're crazy. It's the best thing ever. Or if, you're maybe even feel even more strongly than I do about that, like, it's tedious. I just much prefer the show, and I really wish they hadn't rushed the last 2 seasons. I wish they had taken their time with it to make those last 2 seasons top-notch. But it is what it is. What are you going to do? I will keep watching House of the Dragon and loving that, hopefully. As always, thank you so much for your time. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I will talk to you later. Bye-bye.